нет ничего вожделеннее сна. Чар есть у него тишина. У него на устах ни печаль, ни смех, и в бездонных очах много тайных утех. У него широки два крыла, и легки, так легки, как полночная мгла. Не понять, как несет, и куда, и на чем он крылами взмахнет и не двинет плечом.
Profession makes it necessary to speak different languages. You don't want to learn it the old-fashioned way because it takes a long time. Gabriel Wyner was in the situation he had to know different languages, and he made out of this necessity his profession, a new profession. And that is the way we like people to think at Pink. Very creative. Gabriel Wyner, please come on stage. You probably have seen him before.
So there's a myth when it comes to learning languages. And that myth is that children are exceptionally gifted at learning languages, and that we lose this gift when we grow up. And we have good reason for believing in this myth because many of us have had this experience. We have gone to school, we've gone to college or high school and studied, let's say, French for years and struggled. And we studied and studied and studied, and then we show up in France and we meet a 5-year-old child. And that kid speaks way better French than we do. And we've worked so hard, and this kid hasn't worked a day in their lives, and yet they're correcting our grammar. And it's not fair. And what's actually not fair is that you're comparing yourself to a child who has had 15,000 hours of French exposure, where you have had 100, maybe 200, maybe 50. Depends on how much of your classes were taught in French rather than your native language. When you make the fair comparison, you take a child who has been transplanted, let's say, to Spain, had 500 hours of exposure to Spanish there. An adult transplanted to Spain has 500 hours of exposure in classes, on the street, whatever. What you'll find is the adult beats the child every time. We are better at learning languages than children. We are smarter than them. We have learned how to learn. It's one of the parts of growing up. And so, you have to think about, well, why do we believe this with children? And what we come to are 3 main advantages of being a child. Between the ages of 6 months and 12 months, Small window. Kids can hear sounds better than we can. Significant advantage. They can hear the differences between words in different languages in a way that we lose. 2, children are fearless. Huge advantage. They will talk to anyone where we will be afraid. But neither of these advantages outweighs our greater ability to learn. The third advantage is that of time. We don't have 15,000 hours to spend learning French. And so we need something that works a little better than what children do. And to talk about that, I want to talk about some of my own experiences. I began learning languages when I was a kid, around the age of 5. I went to Hebrew school. I took 7 years of Hebrew classes, 3-4 times a week. And at the end of these 7 years of study, I could read the alphabet. Maybe 10 words, maybe 20. So in high school, I went to a high school. I was fortunate they offered Russian. They had really great teachers. I took Russian for 5.5 years. I studied hard. I did well on my tests. I was a good student. And at the end of those 5.5 years, I could read the alphabet again. And maybe 40 words stuck with me. And so I left this experience thinking, okay, I'm not very good at this. I'm good at alphabets, it seems, but that's about it. And so then I made an unfortunate decision. I was always a science nerd. I loved engineering and creating things, and so I wanted to be an engineer, and I enrolled in college as an engineer. And I had this hobby of singing. And I thought, wouldn't it be neat to have a really big hobby? And so I double majored in engineering and opera on kind of a whim. And one of the unfortunate consequences of this was that I needed to take language classes. And I didn't want to take language classes. And a friend of mine suggested a program in Vermont. And this program, basically I could get 2 semesters of credit for 1 summer. And I thought, this sounds good. And the way this program works is that you sign a contract on day 1. And that contract says, if I speak 1 word that is not German, if I read an email that's not in German, if I write anything that's not in German, if I take a phone call and it's not in German, I will be kicked out of the school, no refund. And I thought, that sounds like fun. And so I went. And the first day I showed up and I signed that contract and suddenly realized I didn't speak any German. And so I sat there until someone came up to me and they said, Hallo, ich heiße Joshua, wie heißt du? And I said, I said, Hallo, ich heiße Joshua. Wie heißt du? And I said, ich heiße Gabriel. And I started learning German that way. And 7 weeks later, I could actually speak the language. It wasn't at advanced, perfect, fluent levels, but I could speak the language. I could hold a good conversation. And so I went back. I went back in 2005. I reached fluency in German. I moved to Vienna in 2007 to pursue a master's degree in opera and song. And in 2008, I went to Perugia, Italy, to study Italian, spent the summer there. And in 2010, I cheated on a French test. And that's where all this comes from. I wanted to go back to Vermont, to this program with the contracts, because it was fun. And they offered a level 1 for people who didn't know anything, which was honestly the category I was in with French. But they also offered a level 1.5. Level 1.5 was for people who wanted to go a little bit faster, but still didn't know very much. And I thought, I could probably do that. I know Italian, it's pretty closely related. This is my 3rd language. I have a little bit of time. I could probably study a little bit of French. And so I cheated on this placement test as much as I possibly could, because I figured not knowing any French and cheating is probably enough to get you in level 1.5. So I used Google Translate, and I wrote this horrible French essay, and I found like about.com, how to do French grammar, and I filled out the multiple choice form. And I left it there. And 3 months later, in March, I get an email, and that email says, congratulations! You did really well on your placement test. We're putting you in the intermediate level of French. You have 3 months, and 3 months you're going to sit down with a French speaker in a room, alone, and they're going to talk to you in French, and you're going to have a conversation. just to make sure you didn't do anything stupid, like cheat on your placement test. And so I panicked. And when I panic, I go to the internet, because clearly someone has an answer for everything. And what I found is there were some good answers. There are these systems called spaced repetition systems. They're computer programs. And basically, they're like flashcards. You know these cards where you have like "sha" on one side and "cat" on the other. It's stuff you used at school. These are computerized versions, but they test you at right the perfect moment, right before you forget the information. So they're very efficient. But what people do with these systems is that they learn translations. "Sha," cat. And what I knew from my experiences with Russian and Hebrew is that it wasn't going to work for me. And so to explain what I did instead, I want to talk about the story of two words. Now, word one, we all learned together in a language classroom. We're taking Hungarian. The teacher writes on the board, "Fényképezőgép" is the word for camera. And then writes down 39 other words and then says, "This is going to be your vocabulary quiz. You have a week to study." Word two, you learn quite differently. You are on an adventure throughout Scandinavia with your best friend. One day you find yourselves in this old bar. There are like 10 locals there, sort of old, grizzled people. There's this bartender who is definitely a Viking. If he had horns, he would be a Viking, just giant beard like Viking. And so he's just staring at you and your friend, just kind of oddly, and he says, "Maktor." You think, what is that? And he pulls out 3 shot glasses. And he pulls out a bottle from behind the counter, and it's this green liquid. And on the bottle it says M-O-K-T-O-R, Maktor. And he starts pouring it. And you realize this is not any nice-looking green liquid. This is this viscous, sort of disgusting-looking, slimy liquid. And he puts it under the counter, and he takes out a jar, and he unscrews the jar, and you start smelling decaying fish. And he starts spooning decaying fish into your 3 shot glasses, and he says, "Maktor," and everyone turns around and starts smiling and laughing. And he takes a match, and he lights it, and he lights the 3 shot glasses on fire, and he goes, "Maktor," and soon everyone in the bar is going, "Maktor, Maktor," and your friend, your stupid friend, picks up this glass, and he blows it out, and he says, "Maktor," and he drinks it. And the bartender, he just screams and he says, "Yes, Maktor," and he blows it out and he drinks it. And then everyone is chanting and staring at you. And you pick up the glass, and you blow it out, and you say, "Maktor," and you drink it. And it's the worst thing you've ever had in your life. And you'll remember the word Maktor forever. Where you have already forgotten the Hungarian word for camera. Why? Why? So let's talk about memory and what memories are. Memories are not located in any particular spot in your brain. Memories are the connections between different regions of your brain. Maktor, for instance, you encounter a lot of different sensations with this word. You encountered the spelling on the bottle. It said M-O-K-T-O-R, which connected with the sound of the barkeep saying Maktor, and the sound of your stupid friend saying Maktor, and the sound of everyone in that bar screaming Maktor. The sound and the spelling, they interconnect, they form a memory. Those 2 connections connect to other things. There's the Viking barkeep. It connects to his face. His face is part of Maktor. This bottle of green, disgusting liquid, that's connected to Maktor. This shot glass, this frothy, white, disgusting-looking shot glass, that's connected to Maktor. All of these images are inside the memory of this word. And the jar of fish, of course. You have personal connections. You have sensory experiences. The heat of the burning shot glass. The stench of decaying fish. That horrible taste. There's emotional content. Your feeling of disgust, that's part of Maktor. The feeling of anger at your friend, the excitement of the moment. This also connects with your story, your life story. What do you think of Scandinavia? What do you think of alcohol in general? What about bars? What about your best friend? This is part of your best friend's story and your story with your best friend. All of these connections form a memory that helps you remember this word. Whereas the Hungarian word for camera, well, you don't even have the sound. you don't have very much to hold on to at all. This sort of not sound gibberish thing that started with Fenny something, this non-existent memory, is not connected to digital cameras. It's not connected to iPhone cameras. It's not connected to photos you've taken in your life. You don't think about those things when you see this word, which was Fenikepezugeep, gibberish. Those are connected to a different word. That different word, if you know English well enough, then that different word may well have these connections. Camera may well evoke images of iPhone cameras and digital cameras and SLR cameras and all this stuff, but Fenikepezugeep does not. And so you forget that word. So what do you do with this? Well, let's come back to that French experience. My situation was this. I had 3 months until that terrifying interview. And unfortunately, I was taking 2 master's programs at the time, so I had 6 days a week of class, and so I had basically an hour a day on the subway to study, and Sundays and Austrian national holidays, of which thankfully there are many. And during that time, I did one thing. I made flashcards in this computerized flashcard system. But instead of doing translations, what I began with were pictures. If I wanted to learn a word like chien in French, I would search for that on Google Images. And I would find that the French conception of a chien, a dog, was different than my own. On their blogs, they would choose different pictures. They were slightly cuter and smaller and more French. And so I would build up a vocabulary using pictures alone, pictures in French. English was forbidden from these flashcards, not one word of English. And when I had enough vocabulary, I started stringing those words together into sentences in order to learn the more abstract words. If I wanted to learn a word like went, the past tense of to go, well, what does went look like? Well, what went looks like is a sentence that says, yesterday I blank to school. In parentheses, it has to go. This is some special form of the word to go that fits in that slot in the sentence. There would be a picture of a schoolhouse. And so I built up my grammar that way. And 3 months later, I showed up into that room with the French teacher. And she began the conversation with bonjour. And the first thing that came to my mind was bonjour. And she started speaking to me in French, and I realized that I understood all the things she was saying. And I even knew what to say back. And it wasn't fluent, and it wasn't easy. It was a little stunted, the conversation, but it was a conversation in French. And this was the first time I've ever spoken French in my life. And I was speaking in French and thinking in French. And at the end of this conversation, she stood up and she said, "You know, we made a mistake. Your placement test said you were at the intermediate level. We're going to place you in the advanced level." And so over that summer, over those 7 weeks, I read 10 books. We wrote 70 pages of French essays, and by the end of that summer, I was fluent in French. And I realized that I was onto something. And so I started writing about this, and I started testing things and experimenting. And I learned Russian in 2012. I had my revenge on that language. In 2013, I learned Hungarian. A couple of months ago, I began Japanese. And every one of these experiences has taught me things. It has shown me ways of tweaking the system, of finding little efficiency boosts here and there. But the overall concept remains exactly the same. If you want to learn a language efficiently, then you need to give that language life. Every word needs to connect with images and sounds and emotions and sense and tastes. Every bit of grammar can't be some abstract grammatical law. It needs to be something that helps you tell a story. And when you do that, you'll find that the words begin to stick in your mind And the grammar, it starts to make sense, and it starts to stick too. And you begin to realize that this is not something that you need to have some kind of language gene, some sort of gift from God to learn. This is something that everyone has both the time and the ability to do. Thank you.
Gabriel Wyner.